Oh, okay. Welcome to another episode of Data Girl Informs. I'm here with Alyssa Coon, who's a privacy attorney and privacy consultant for, I'm sorry, I don't remember the pronunciation. Alyssa.
Maggio, yeah.
Gosh, I'm so sorry.
No,
It's
no.
been, I had some technical issues before this started, so it kind of threw me off. Yeah, I'm so excited to talk to Alyssa because when she told me about how she raises her informed digital citizens at home, it kind of blew me away because it just is an alternative method that's really empowers the kids, and I'm really looking forward to sharing that with a wider audience.
No, I am too. I think what you do is fantastic. It's absolutely wonderful content, and I utilize a kind of a similar approach. It just informing them, right? So I've got a 9-year old and a 7-year old, and obviously technology is rampant. And I don't want to tell them no. I'd like to make informed decisions, right? And so I think, if I can tell everybody one thing to take away from this is don't be afraid to explore new technology with your children. And to be honest, if you don't understand how a technology works, my son will he'll find applications and websites and all sorts of things that he wants to do. And it's hard for me to keep up, right? But it's sort of okay, before we go, when we purchase anything, we've got to understand what it does, what's the purpose, understand what information it's capturing. And so it's being real honest. And it can be really difficult to kind of take that pause and admit that you don't know everything, and that you don't fully understand something. But I think, I don't know, I think it makes you more human as a parent. And it makes my son stop and think, well, let's look it up, right? Let's look at, what do these ratings mean? What's the description? What's the content that's in there? What does that mean for you, right? Are you prepared to look at that content? Are you prepared to have conversations around what that content might be? Graphic violence, right? Blood and gore and those types of things. What does that mean? And what is the difference between fiction and reality? So it's extremely fun. I think just to keep kind of an open mind. My daughter, 7 years old, my biggest thing with her is not oversharing, right? So it's less about, she doesn't go and find the technology. She kind of piggybacks off of her brother, but it's sort of what's the appropriate level of information to share. And my favorite story is she was on VR. She's got a VR headset and she's in a game called Gorilla Tag, where the kids are all, they're gorillas and they go around, they're different colors and they can buy different things. And someone was asking her what her age was, like, oh, how old are you? And she's like, I don't see how that's relevant. I don't know. You don't need to know my age. And I thought it was hilarious because my kids, our rule is, if you're engaging in chat or any of that stuff, you've got to be in a main area, right? So in our living room where I can hear, my husband can hear, and we can kind of see what's going on. So not in your rooms. But I thought that was great. It was one of those, because I had told her they don't need to know your
Yeah.
name, they don't need to know the city you're in, they don't need to know your age, what school you go to. It's a virtual world, right? So you don't need to disclose anything. You are your gamer tag, and that's it, right? You could get them an age range if you want to, but it's not, it shouldn't be relevant. And it was great to hear a 7-year-old say that.
No, that's amazing. Really, it is. I mean, that's it seems like the pinnacle of yes, that's what I wanted, right? To see yes,
Yep.
like because that's critical thinking and at such age that really as you were saying, there's so much to unpack with what you were just saying. I mean, just to start with. You're saying, okay, parents need to not be afraid to admit that they don't know things. I would take a step further that parents need to just admit that it's nearly impossible that they do know. And that's a big, big mentality change from all the past generations, as far as I'm aware. I'm not a historian. Is that we cannot keep up with what the kids are doing online. I think we don't have a chance. We can hardly keep up with what where AI is placed, where is our data being taken, much less understand where kids, for example, recently discovered that the main place that the kids engage with chatbots is not chat gpt but snapchat ai. So I think, yeah, you have to have an approach that doesn't say that you know, because you don't. Right.
Yeah, and I think it's having that open dialogue. My son knows, not to download things. Obviously, he's 9, right? So you can't download things on your own. He's not purchasing things on his own. So he comes to me, and that's when we kind of have that conversation. And I learned real quick that he's gonna know more about it when he comes and presents it to me because he's already done a little bit of tinking and thinking on it, right? And he's tinkered and looked it up. And I think it's fun. I think it's creating the awareness that the ratings mean something and the permission settings mean something, and that having those conversations around it, and then the privacy, right? So having the privacy notice. I love when my son comes to me and he wants to do something and there's that pop-up, right? And as a privacy attorney, right, I draft notices. It's a huge part of what I do is reading the terms and conditions. So it's reading it and saying, okay, it wants access to your camera, it wants access to your location, it wants access to this or that information. So we need to think through why. And so I want him to feel empowered to question the why you need to capture that information. Is it, a functional, essential requirement, or is it something that adds value to the game? Is it an optional thing where you can still play the game? It just, you're not giving away that data. But it's kind of it's an important principle. And as parents, we don't always know what our rights are or what makes sense, right? And you don't want to just click the box. You want to sit through and
Yeah,
really think.
yeah,
And I think teaching them to think through it, right, is really important. And yeah, I think, like I said, the core thing is acknowledging that you don't know it. And so it empowers them to feel, well, I don't know it either, right? And it's okay to live in this unknown when it's something new and novel, because that's going to be their entire life. This technology is going to constantly evolve. And you don't want them
yeah.
to feel like afraid to ask questions or express that ignorance, because I wouldn't want them to go up to someone and pretend they know something and they don't, and they I don't know, they end up sharing too much information or not the right amount of information. So it's a skill set. Question
No,
the
I think,
why.
I mean, and that's, yeah, that's interesting what you said. To be afraid to ask or admit that you don't know, because I think parents, a lot of parents might have trouble, especially the ones that work in a corporate world. I've been out of the corporate world for like at least 5 years now, so about four. But there, a lot of times you are afraid to ask questions. People want to look, and you just kind of take it as it is and ask the person next to you afterwards. But it's just, it's different now. It's developing, and I agree with you that it's one of the biggest gifts that we can give to our kids is teach them, ask questions. There's nothing wrong with not knowing. And another thing I wanted to ask you, because this for me really brought the point home, where you were talking about you told me, not now, in the previous chat, about one of the games where you were reading about the ratings, and you said your son has to be able to have certain conversations with you if he wants to play the games. Would you mind playing?
Yeah, no,
Because I
I mean,
really love that one. Yeah.
yeah, no, so some of these games, it's mature content or sexual content or something like that. And, so when we're looking at the game, we go and we look at the description and we look at the reviews and what it says. And I'm like, are you ready to have a conversation about what sexual content is and what's appropriate and all that? And he'll walk away like, nope, no, I don't want to have that conversation. I'm like, well, if we can't have that conversation, then you can't play the game, right? Because the rule of entry is that we need to be able to talk about what these things mean. But I want him to think about it, right? This is part of the, just I have my job as a parent is to, if I know that there's going to be a certain type of content, to prep you. And if you don't want to have the conversation to prep you for that content, then maybe we're not ready for it. And it's been, it's one of the, he's very open to just saying, nope, don't want it. As soon as we read that in there, it's very uncomfortable, right? And I mean, that's a larger conversation around the birds and the bees, but it will shut it down. I'm just like, there's a reason why you have these descriptions. But I
Oh,
do love
it
it.
is.
And
Yeah.
it's
No, it's
awkward.
amazing. Yeah. My daughter's around the same age as your children, and it is amazing where they're at a moment where they're just seeping these things up. And then in a moment where, for example, you don't necessarily give the right answer or have the right answer, you've built a certain level of trust that they. Because once my daughter, she's like, I had somehow closed the tablet and phone. She didn't want that she wasn't interested anymore. And then she found it. And she said, "Can I have it?" And I just didn't have an answer. And I was like, "No." And she said, "Why?" And I didn't have an answer. I hadn't processed it in my mind. Why? And I couldn't give her an answer. And she was like, "Okay, I trust you, but you're going to come back to me and tell me why."
No, that's good. That's good that she trusts you, and sometimes it is. It's like, like if I take away the tablet because my daughter did something wrong, right? And it's sort of a, why did I take away? I've explained to her that, you were on it too long. I asked you to get off and you were on it past the time that you needed to be. And then if she wants it back, I'm like, I have to think about it. I need to think about, are you going to listen? Are you going to abide by the rules? And I think that if it's not a part of their life and then it becomes a part of their life, you do need to just be honest with yourself and be honest with them. Just say, I need to think about it. Cause then, I might want to set limits and might set, parameters for it or have a conversation, and you need to give me time to get ready for that, and that way we can both be engaged in this and be okay, because I don't want to give it to you and then immediately feel regret, or, oh, I didn't tell you this, or I didn't tell you not to do this, or didn't explain what I was expecting. I think, and that actually gets me to an important point, is the assumptions, right? You don't want to make assumptions about what your kids are doing. It's better to have clarity as to what they're doing. So what does your daughter want to do? So when my daughter asked me for a tablet or for my phone to look at, something on YouTube, oh, what are you going to look for? What are you looking to do? What are you wanting to accomplish, right? So if you want to, go into text messages, who are you going to text message, right? And it's not, I don't want to and she knows I'm not going to say no necessarily. I just want to understand, because then I can say, oh, okay, we'll only do it to these people, or only do it for this long, or this and that. But then we have this conversation, right? We're navigating and negotiating a social contract in that moment. I'm not assuming that she's going to do something nefarious, or I'm not assuming that she's not going to do something nefarious. I want to take assumption out of it.
Yeah. No, exactly. That's also important. Yeah. To not, assume, and a certain level of trust with checking. I mean, do you have some uh, like controls, parental controls or checks, or can you see who they're actually communicating with, or do you just have the trust?
No, I do. I've got, with my son's phone, like I have access to, I can see, who he's communicating with and everything. But I don't want to rely on that. I'd rather have, the trust. So I do have the restriction settings, and I've got all of that on the different devices so that they can't see certain things. I've got the child profile set up where necessary. But I actually don't tell them that necessarily, so it's just sort of I want them to have that conversation. And there are sometimes where my son will come against some of the parameters, and he's like, Mom, it won't let me do this. It's restricted. And then I'll talk about, okay, well, this is what the restriction is setting at. What exactly are you trying to get at? But I lead with the trust. I'd like there to be
Mhm.
trust, but I do, on the back end, have controls in place. So here, not
Yeah,
100%
yeah.
on my mommy game, right? Because you can't be there 100% of the time. If they go and grab the device and we're on a call or I'm doing something, right? I still want to have some extra, barrier there. Uh,
Well, I think that has to do with your profession, right? I mean, trust with some checks and controls, and trust only goes so far. Um, um, I what about when they get older? Because this is, I think, we're kind of lucky that the peer pressure isn't necessarily there yet. Um, do you have any experience with other parents or from other kids, how that the dialogue might change when they get, 14, 15, 16, and a lot of kids are kind of free online without the controls and without the parental
To be honest,
discussions.
yeah, most of the parents that I engage with, there's two schools, right? There's the ones that just they lock down the technology and they're hoping that the kids don't have access to it, right? So kind of like what you're seeing in Florida and kind of around where like, nope, you're just until you're 15 or 16, you're not having access to it. And I think you do have this window where they're 12, 13, 14, where you need to give them access. A lot of parents also just they rely solely on the restrictive settings and
Mm.
the scanning tool, so being able to monitor it on the back end, but they're not having the conversations. I think once again, it's got to be somewhere in the middle, and I think it depends on the parent-child relationship. But I think if you start young, instilling the conversation and say that it's okay, then when they transition to be on their own, they're going to be kind of prepared to think through. Do I really want this to be out there forever? Permanence is something that I talk to my daughter about, right? So she likes to film little videos and things like that, and I just say you just got to be mindful of what you say, when you are on social media, it will live forever. You can't guarantee
Mhm.
that it gets removed. So I think as the restrictions lessen and they have more access, I think that's when the conversations become more important. And I'm not sure that everybody feels comfortable having those conversations, but it's sort of like the birds and the bees. It's sort of like any other parental guiding conversation around bullying and things like that. You need to temper them. I do think that, like you said, at 9, the peer pressure isn't there, but 10, 11, 12, 13, you're going to have a lot
Mm.
more of that. What is said on social media might impact their social, um, their social status, right? And then their sense of self. I think it becomes really important to set them up for success, earlier, having the conversation before they get to an age where they can do that and say, it is virtual, right? And what people
Yeah,
say on the other side of a screen isn't always indicative of what they actually feel, right? People feel a sense of power when they can't see you and they're not face to face. So when you text something, you can text something that's a lot meaner, and a lot more hurtful than you would say to a person's face. People get brave, right? They have this
yeah,
false sense of security and bravery. And I think that's an important conversation. I've had a little bit of that with my son, but most of his stuff is very high level. He's got a good group of friends, and he's limited in who he communicates with. But I think I have told him, you don't want to say anything hurtful to someone else, right? You don't want to feel the sense of false courage, right? That you can say something
yeah,
and it doesn't matter; it just disappears. It's words on a text message, because what you say can have lasting impacts, because you don't know, in an email or a text message, you lose that sense of that the context, right? The facial impression, expression isn't there. The body language isn't there. But you don't know how it's going to be construed on the other side. So just be
yeah.
really mindful. Um, and he would text my mom. He texts my mom all the time, actually. But he was texting her like the stream of consciousness. And I remember looking at it one time and I'm like, I don't think he realizes like what he's doing, and I'm just like, it's really confusing. You're just sending all these gifts and everything. And it was silly stuff, right? But I'm like, you gotta be mindful of her time, right? She was with her friend and, she kind of said, let's talk later. So I think when they get older, it's going to be more important that they understand the impact of their words so that they can also understand the impact of other people's words and images, right? Which you're sharing, because there's just not that context. Um, but I haven't found any really good resources. And I don't think I've got like one person that has done it really well for that transition.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, as you say, each family is different. It's kind of hard. It's hard to know what the best practice is, and I do think the best practice is talking, right? Because that also builds a bridge between the online world and the offline world. Because the more they get into the teenage years, the more they're going to want to separate from the family, branch out, make other friends. It'll be exciting, and the more they have to be prepared, they have to ask the questions. And I was thinking also, when we were talking, I had one mother on a few months ago who had her daughter on the family plan, so it was kid controlled, and then the daughter was 14 and it was off. It just dropped from Google because they went up to 14. Excuse me. She didn't even get this message, right? So that's also a risk, that if you're just relying on the controls, there's legal limits. I don't know if these are legal limits, or you probably know that at some point you cannot control them because they're of their age of consent, and if they haven't had these conversations, they've just been controlled. All of a sudden, this online world comes crashing down on them. um, and another thing I thought is that it's, as you say, the conversations can be difficult. You don't necessarily want to tell your children what they could find on the other side. um, because I heard a podcast the other day. It's like, once provide you provide the world to your child, you're also providing access to your child to the world. I think that maybe is another reason why parents have difficulty having these conversations, right? Because they don't want their child to know what kind of people they might encounter.
No, I mean it's stranger danger, but in a whole new world, right? And the types of dangers are a little more profound and scary in the internet, right? It's not just, oh, someone can snatch you up, right? Like, don't say hi and don't take candy from strangers, right? Like when you were a kid, don't go into people's cars or houses. It's you're there, and some of these people that are in these rooms, they're pretending to be kids, right? And you have no idea what their intent is. So setting up meetings and exchanging personal information, and so that's I do. I mean, I have conversations with my kids like that. You should interact with the child a couple of times before you friend them, because in some of these games you can, put people as friends, right? And then that's
Yeah.
where, the chat and stuff like that is. You don't really know who it is on the other end. And we actually, my family will play with like voice changers and things like that, and some of the apps
Mm,
where I'm like, but see, you can change your voice to sound like anybody. Anybody
mm,
can also change their voice to sound like anybody. And so it's
yeah.
important, little nuances. It's uncomfortable. It's scary. Um, but I think if you don't give them a little sense of being leery, then you're doing them a disservice. Like you said with your friend, if all of a
Yeah.
sudden the guardrails are out, then they don't really know, what's out there. So, and approach it bite-sized pieces, right? You don't want to tell them that there are horrible predators and the world is a nasty place and everybody's out to get them. But just letting them know that it's not always what it seems, right? I mean, you don't even know if it's a person at this point that you're engaging with.
Yeah, exactly. I was just going to say that I was just reading some research that week I spent a lot of time researching these chatbots, these AI chatbots, and how cyber predators use them, and how AI has made their job much more efficient because they can just program the chatbot, scrape the data, analyze who's vulnerable, send another chatbot in to the vulnerable ones to have a conversation. It's just mind-boggling, and I think people are having trouble keeping up with that AI is also in the cameras that are walking down the street, much less that you have virtual people that are programmed to learn by predators, virtual machines, not people. It's all you can do is as you said, teach them to be informed, ask questions, critical thinking.
Yeah, and that's it. It really is. It's kind of going back to basics, right? Like the stranger danger and things like that. Just being aware of your surroundings, and even if it's a virtual world, being aware of the surroundings. If something doesn't feel right, um, then it's probably not right, right? So trust your instincts and ask the questions. Don't give out too much information. Don't, like you said, that they're going after vulnerabilities, right? Don't be vulnerable. So don't give out information that someone can use against you. It's it's one of the, and like I said, it really comes back to just being aware of the fact that you're not going to have all the right answers, but opening up the conversation so that you can be a part of what they're doing. I read an article recently, and it was show an interest in what your kids are looking at, right? The games that they're playing and things like that. It'll
Yeah,
give you insight into what their mental state is, right? So it's kind of a
yeah. Oh, that's
psychology thing.
yeah,
Yes, so what kind of games are they playing? Are they playing a lot of first person shooters, right? Are they what kind of are they creating people, right? Are they doing games where they're creating avatars and building worlds? It can give you insight into what they're interested in. It also will give you insight into the risks that they have,
mm,
right? Because you can look at those games and kind of read the reviews and kind of understand what types of interactions are happening in that game. And then you can maybe have an informed conversation specific to an application or a game or a service, right? I've done that. My son's recently into this game called Half-Life, and so he's explaining it to me, and I'm sitting there and I'm googling like what everything there is to know about Half-Life, right? And it's a first-person shooter, and it's aliens, but it's like, okay, what are all the? How can you engage, and what does this mean, and what's the purpose of it? And then I can, through understanding kind of the game and the premise of the game, I can then have an informed conversation around what we should be, worried about, right? And like what's real and
yeah,
what's not real, and this type of thing. Um, but I don't know. For me, if there's a childlike wonder with it, I love technology,
yeah,
and I think it's easier for me to kind of approach it that way. But I would try to empower people, parents, especially and guardians, just to find that childlike wonder. If your kid is interested in something, be interested in it too, and that can be something that you can share an interest in, and that will empower you to make an informed decision. And you can bond over it, right?
exactly. I was thinking, I'm just because we're almost out of time, but I'm just going to close with this thought because that reminded me back in the day when I was a teenager. It wasn't so easy as for parents to get involved in things that their children were involved in because you had to physically go somewhere.
Right? Yeah. Be at the mall for hours and hours seeing where your kid goes, right?
And your parent and your kids are like, "Oh, mom, dad." But now you can just log on to the game yourself and play the game, or go onto their social media and kind of get a feel for it, and you can do it without being so obvious to them that they will. be embarrassed by your presence.
Yep. No, that's a great point.
Thank you so much. I don't know, just for closing, do you want to give some last hot tip also from your position as a privacy lawyer, attorney?
Yeah, I would say that, you have rights, your children have rights, and the rights include not sharing information when it doesn't fit. So if there's not a need to share it, then you should think about not sharing it. So just being mindful, you don't always have to share your location. You don't always have to share your access to your camera or your photos or, other content on your phone. Being mindful of what you're putting out there and, when you're getting access on your device or, if you're uploading stuff, um, that would be it. I think it's pivotal for us as people to understand that just because we want to engage in something doesn't mean we always have to. It's not quid pro quo. We don't always have to give them a ton of information.
Yeah.
Some of these apps, I will tell you, we will decline the rights to photos and access, and the app works just
Yeah.
fine. So
Yeah.
it was an
Yeah.
extra.
Yeah.
It wasn't necessary. And so sometimes we'll do it just as a fluke. Okay, if we don't put the camera on, does the game still function? So it's a why. It is for everybody. Just question, why do I need to give you all of this information on an application or a form? Every single time you fill out something, do you have to fill in your address? How many times would you
Yeah.
need my address?
Yeah.
So just question it. It's like I said, it comes back to why. Just always ask why before you're sharing your personal information. Because once you share it, you can't take it back. It's out there,
Yeah.
right? You
That's true.
can't you
Yeah.
can't put the glue back in the bottle. Like it's gone.
No, thank you. Really, thank you so much. I hope that this chat inspires a lot of parents to not be afraid to talk and take this other path of this possibility. Thank you so much, Alyssa, and we're looking forward to hearing more from you
Yeah. Thank you for having
on
me.
your
Thank you.
endeavors. Thank you. Thank you, everyone who listened. Bye.